Good morning on a lovely Monday morning, the 26th of November 2012. You're watching Good Morning Sri Lanka on MTV Sports, and I hope you've looking forward to a great week ahead and you've enjoyed your weekend. Now, taking a look at today, taking a look at history and what has happened on the 26th of November. Way back, about 90 years back, for those interested in history, in Egypt actually, this was the day that Tutankhamun's tomb was opened to the public way back in 1922, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, Howard Carter peered into the tomb of King Tutankhamun. And then also in 1992, the British government announced that Queen Elizabeth II had volunteered to start paying taxes on her personal income. And for those of you on a lighter note who are interested in pro wrestling, in 98, Hulk Hogan announced that he was retiring from pro wrestling and was actually going to run for president in 2000. So that's what has happened over history, some of the interesting things that has happened in history on the 26th of November. But let's hope it's a memorable day for you as well. Taking a look at some of the local stories that's been happening over the weekend. On the headlines, we have bad news starting off. Floods have killed 5 and displaced thousands. Now, adverse weather conditions had left 5 people dead in several areas during the last 2 days, while several districts have been affected by floods, and that was a report from the Disaster Management Center yesterday. And also, 2 Nigerian nationals and Sri Lankan were arrested by the Chilla police for sending fake text messages to gullible persons stating that they had won a lottery and trying to play out a scam there. And also some interesting stories on social media and its development. No action for spreading religious hatred on Facebook. Sri Lankan Computer Emergency Response Team has said that legally they cannot take any concrete action against those who spread religious and racial hatred on Facebook. But as we all know, we do have a moral responsibility to stay away and avoid such things, especially on social media where it's accessible to the entire world and it's meant to bring people together, not to create divisions. Now, taking a look at some of the sports news as well, the Mahinda Rajapaksa International Football Tournament will be held next month in Navalapitiya. Now, the first of its kind will take place next month in Navalapitiya, and it will be an international football tournament which will definitely bring in some color to the local football arena as well. And that I think it's a good move, and let's hope that it really brings out some of the talent of the local footballers as well. And also in cricket, India versus England, now that was a fiasco because it was a spinning wicket, and this is what India thought that they could take advantage of in the match against England, but they were definitely on a back foot against England over the weekend as well. So that's a look up into some sports stories as well. Now, after the break, we're going to have a very interesting discussion with someone who's been really involved in a lot of things and a lot of things to do with reconciliation and bridge building. And also we've had an entire week focusing on women's empowerment and eradicating gender-based violence. Now, the climax of it, or rather the launch of the campaign, was held yesterday. That was the 16 days of activism, and we're going to talk a lot about that after we come back from this short break. Stay tuned to Good Morning Sri Lanka. Good morning once again, and welcome back to Good Morning Sri Lanka. Now, right beside me we have Dawn Hayden, someone who's been in Sri Lanka and who's been very actively working in a lot of different fields, but today she's here to talk specifically about the 16 days of activism. Good morning, Dawn.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
Yes, I'm doing well as well, and let's hope this week turns out great too, because yesterday you all had a very successful event, and something, the numbers actually was more than you expected, if I'm not mistaken.
It really was. Yesterday was a beautiful Sunday. We had a little bit of rain in the late afternoon, but we started off with a wonderful walk that was supported through Women in Need, WIN, and they walked. We had about 450 people walk a mile in her shoes, and we started at Bishop College and we ended at the Golf Face Green. We had 150 youth that USAID supported from North and South to come together and to represent, to just take a stand against violence against women and girls.
Okay, now we've spoken a bit about some of the activities that will be happening in the 16 days of activism, but what are you involved in, and would you like to elaborate on some of the activities that you all have planned out for these days?
Sure. We've been doing a lot of different activities, and we've been building up to the 16 days of activism over the course of the last year. So part of our program has been, under the USAID RISN program, we've started a sexual assault forensic examination component, where we've been working with the leading experts in Sri Lanka. We've been really, really fortunate to work with such talented and inspired people who have worked with us for months to develop a curriculum to train medical legal officers on how to collect sexual assault forensic evidence.
Right.
And right now, I mean, I'm very happy to report that in partnership with the Ministry of Health, 75% of the medical legal officers in the country have been certified to collect sexual assault forensic evidence. They've gone through a 60-hour training program and have just really committed and learned a lot and done a lot. And we're really excited about that.
Yeah, and earlier on, a couple of weeks back, we had a medical officer also who was specializing in sexual abuse forensics. Now, talking a bit about the medical aspect of it. Now, do you see that there's a big gap, or there's a big lack of the forensics that are collected and presented? And do you see that as a real problem for presenting evidence properly in cases where rape and sexual abuse have happened?
Well, I think that in many cases of sexual assault, there might not be any forensic evidence that can be collected, right? So, for example, in cases of child sexual abuse, a lot of times that's going to be reported maybe months after or years after the crime had actually been committed. But in cases of sexual violence, if it is reported in a timely way, very valuable evidence can be collected. And what we were seeking to do through this program activity was at least provide the training and the resources and the tools to be able to properly collect this evidence so that it can be used in a court of law.
And sexual abuse, talking about the topic as a whole, how big of a problem is it globally? As a person who's been working in different countries and who has spoken to different people and really analyzed the situation, how big of a problem is it globally? Because there's a common misconception, I would say, that these things are prevalent more in countries that are developing rather than the developed countries.
Right, and a lot of people think that, but the truth is that gender-based violence and sexual violence occur whether it's in Sri Lanka or the United States of America or any other nation, that gender-based violence affects all of us, and it's not. It doesn't favor one ethnicity or one faith group or one economic group. It cuts through all of that. Really, gender-based violence doesn't have any boundaries. So it happens in villages, it happens in cities, it happens in towns, it happens in every community.
And you explained to me just before the show as well how really people need to stand up and speak up against this. If you just like to mention how this all came into being, how people realize that that they need to take an active step against this.
Sure. Well, I think that one of the primary components of sexual violence and gender-based violence is that people are so quiet about it. There's a lot of shame. People are embarrassed. They feel guilty. Maybe they're afraid that the people in their community are going to respond or think differently of them. It can affect their social standing or their social status. And so people end up staying quiet. Maybe they're afraid of the perpetrator. Maybe they're afraid that they'll be killed. Maybe they're afraid that, that there'll be more violence against them or their children. And so there's a lot of reasons for people to stay quiet. But the reasons for us to stay quiet provide the impetus for us to really want to stand up and rise up and speak out against the violence, because silence is what keeps the violence there, right? But if we're able to break that silence, then we can start to try to break that cycle where we allow this gender-based violence to happen. One of the things that we found is that, back during the beginning of the women's movement in the States, it was that women got together just over kitchen tables and they ate food together and they talked, right? And then everyone started realizing that they also had the same problem, and it's the same here, right? I mean, we just have to get together and talk about it, and we have to talk early and we have to talk often, and we have to to be able to provide a space from all different levels for people to be able to come out and take a stand and to take concrete action to not condoning this violence anymore.
Exactly, and you were mentioning how a lot of people, when you go for these seminars and when you talk to these people, a lot of almost everyone in the room says that they at least know someone personally or has been personally part of sexual abuse.
I mean, every single one of us knows someone or have ourselves been affected by gender-based violence. So every single person in every community in the world knows someone who's affected by gender-based violence. So it's a global issue of tremendous proportion, and we really need, and it's not just a women's issue. So there's also this misperception that gender-based violence is a women's issue. Well, I disagree with that, right? This is an issue that affects all of us. It affects women, and it affects men, girls, and boys. If I'm a young boy and I'm seeing my mother being beaten, that's going to affect me personally, right? And in the same way, if I'm a young girl and I see my auntie, being harassed on the bus, and I can't do anything about it, it's going to affect me too. So I think that all of us are affected, and that for a lot of people, we just don't have access to the tools or understand what can we do, right? How can we intervene? How can we stop this? Like, maybe we feel like it's not our place. Maybe we feel like someone else should be the one who's responsible for addressing that. Maybe we feel like it's the victim's fault. That happens all the time, right? I mean, she should not have been on that bus that late. If she hadn't been on the bus, she never would have been harassed. What we need to do is start pointing the finger, like you were saying with Sri Lanka Youth Unite, that there was a program where men and boys got onto buses and said, "We're sorry."
Exactly.
Right?
The usual conception is that it's always the victim who is further victimized by not accepting the fact that this happens. And what really need to do is change that perception also.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot that men and boys specifically can do to change that perception, where men can show that real strength comes in treating women and girls fairly and equally and lovingly, right? And that violence doesn't have a space in that equation, and that takes a strong person to love, right? And I think that that's really the bottom line, is that we need to all stand together and to make sure that our friends, our families, and our neighbors, that if they're facing a problem, that they know that they can come to talk to us about it,
and that they're not alone.
And they're not alone.
True enough. Now we're going to talk more with Dawn, but right about now we're going to head on to a short break, but we'll be back to talk more on this very important topic. Stay tuned to Good Morning Sri Lanka.